Like any kid working in a bike shop, being surrounded by all the latest bling meant that the desire to upgrade my own bike occupied more of my mind than arguably it should have done. Sadly, the amount of money you can earn when you're working in a bike shop doesn't really lend itself to being able to buy all the shiny things that surround you every single day. However, that was never going to discourage me. After plenty of waiting and hunting around for the right bike, a Specialized S-Works Allez came up for sale in my size on Facebook Marketplace. It was being sold by a local lad, a local racer actually, and he was wanting to move it on to make space for next season's rig. To me, this was absolutely ideal. Buying a second-hand aluminium bike did not worry me at all, and the ability to buy into the S-Works moniker for a discount price, well, it was a done deal. After a meetup at the local Sunday circuit race and an envelope of 50s handed over later, my new bike was grabbed out the back of their team van. Of course, the bike went straight to the shop where I was working to allow the modifications to begin. Little did I know at the time, but this bike would go on to join me for countless adventures and become the one bike that I have vowed to never, ever sell. The frame set is what made me fall in love. The satin finish on the paint was the perfect balance between gloss and matte, and the satin chrome decals set it off incredibly well. And the virtually invisible welds trick the eye into thinking that it could be carbon fibre. Specialized fitted an S-Works level fork which utilised their top level carbon at the time, and the aluminium, well, that was hydroformed, meaning that they could replicate the shape of the tarmac again at the time. But it also meant that weight was kept down to a minimum. The overall weight of the frame by itself hovers around that 1,000-gram mark, which actually is pretty good. The bike predominantly plays host to an Ultegra 6800 group set, as this is what the bike came with when I bought it. However, in my eyes, the Dura-Race 9000 group set is probably the prettiest group set ever made. So I decided to take the plunge and buy the chain set and the rear mech. Since these components are arguably the most visible parts of a group set, I think they do a really good job of increasing the bike's curb appeal. And quite frankly, the chrome details on the components paired with the frame itself, it's just a match made in heaven. When I did change the chain set, it did also provide the opportunity to revise the gear ratios. The bike came with a 53/39, however, I was finding that my little chicken legs were struggling, so I opted for a 52/38. Now, it may not seem like a huge change, and granted, it's not, but out on the road, I found that turning the cranks just felt so much better. And when I paired that with an 11/28 cassette, the ratios for me, they just fell into place. The Roval CLX 40s that the bike came with are sadly no longer with me. After 6 months of use, I decided to sell them before the value either dropped out of them because, road disc brake bikes were finally coming onto the market, but I was also wary of the fact that if I kept using them, I was going to wear through that brake track and again, they would end up essentially valueless. As a young lad in a bike shop, I wasn't really in the position to lose that kind of money over an extra couple of watts. So I hunted down on the web a set of just cheap Chinese carbon wheels for about 300 quid. And say what you will about them, but actually these Chinese knockoffs have actually been pretty decent. They're easy to service with their sealed cartridge bearings, they've never needed truing, and actually when you pair them with a set of Swiss Dot Black Prince carbon pads, when you pull on the levers, you will definitely stop. I've always run the same tyres on this bike, a set of 28C S-Works turbo tyres. For me, they provide a great balance between comfort, grip, and just downright speed. The qualities of the S-Works turbos are also helped by the fact that I've been running the turbo tubes, which are a lightweight butyl inner tube, but they're also pre-tout, meaning that helps them lower their rolling resistance ever so slightly. The other thing that I really like about those tubes, and it is a bit of a bike nerdy weight weenie thing, but they're also about 40 grams lighter compared to a standard butyl inner tube, so when you do that over both wheels, you're saving nearly 80 grams, which I'll take. The finishing kit was actually the first things that I did change on the bike, and that's because I wanted to get the fit dialed in. I nabbed some 38cm Pro Vibe alloy bars and I paired it with a 100mm S-Works stem. Now, while I was tempted by an integrated carbon setup, my typically stingy self was never really going to stretch that far. And quite frankly, I love how easy this bike is to recable. The seat post is actually one of the few things that has stayed original throughout my entire tenure with the bike. But the saddle, well, that has changed. I started off with a Specialized S-Works tube saddle, which I had for nearly a decade. But after those near 10 years, well, it was looking a little worse for wear. So I have recently actually upgraded and embraced some modern technology in the shape of the Physique Vento Argo 00 saddle. Now, while this saddle is ever so slightly lighter, the real game is the incredibly grippy surface and the increased comfort, no thanks to the super wide wings that it's got. Sadly, the bike isn't without its faults, or should I say quirks. One thing that I wish Specialized had done with this bike was to give it a threaded bottom bracket. Sadly though, this bike came out when BB30s were in their heyday. The months and years that I have spent trying to make this bike be creak-free, well, quite frankly, it's just not worth thinking about. Luckily though, I have now found a solution that does work pretty well, but it does include putting some Loctite on the outer race of the bearings. But you've got to do what you've got to do. Also, some of the bottle cage bolts now spin within the frame, meaning that they can't be undone. Now, before you all start telling me that I can have this fixed, quite frankly, I don't care. One bottle is fine for me and the rides that I show this bike, and really, I don't want to risk losing the oh so cool S-Works bolts. Quite frankly, they're worth the pizzazz. I do also have to be fairly careful with the red paint on this bike. It comes off incredibly easily due to not having a protective clear coat to encapsulate it. But nearly after 8 years of ownership, I think it's held up pretty well considering. As I mentioned previously, I'm never going to sell this bike, so what does the future hold for it? Well, being aluminium, I have no doubt that this bike will outlast me, so long as we don't get acquainted with the underside of a lorry. One thing I've always wanted to upgrade though are the brake calipers. Switching over to some matching Dura-Race 9000 calipers would be brilliant, and it would just add that extra little bit of bling to the setup. Once worn down, I will then also be replacing the tyres for the latest S-Works turbos that got released at the back end of last year. And lastly, I'd also like to fit a new S-Works seat post. The current one has been pretty beaten up over winter rides, and when I've been attaching a rear light to the saddle, it's been chewing up the lacquer, so it's just looking a little bit tired. But overall, I don't really see this bike changing too much more. To me, it's pretty close to being perfect for what I want from this bike. That's my dream road bike and how it came to be, and also why I am never ever going to sell it. Let me know down in the comments though, tell me about the bikes that you are never going to sell and why. I'd be really interested to hear about them. If you enjoyed the video, then please do drop it a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and I'll see you again very soon.